Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I am so pleased to be having my guest Alena Turley on today, who is coming to us from Sydney, Australia. It's in fact so fun. This is the second podcast episode I've recorded today, and it's been an international day. So it just warms my heart that this platform gives me the opportunity to connect with amazing people literally all over the world. So Alena, good morning for you. It's afternoon for me. You're a whole day ahead. You're drinking your morning coffee at the moment. Good morning and welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself, and I'd love to know your journey. How did you get to where you are, and what is it that you're doing in the world that brings passion and purpose to your life?
Oh, thanks, Jory. Thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. That's a great question. There's so much I could say. So my name is Alena. I live in Sydney, in the northern beaches of Sydney, which is a really beautiful place. You can probably hear a bit of a hissing outside. That's cicadas or crickets, maybe you call them. I'm not sure. But it's, I guess, an interesting thing that brings me to this point. I've currently working on something called the Soul Mama Academy. I founded that off the back of 13 years of blogging. I'm now a podcaster as well, but for many years, just out of my experience of motherhood, I just was driven to share about ethical or sustainable living, and also how we as women retain ourselves, keep ourselves whole through the experience of motherhood. And so
isn't that a loaded statement right there?
Huge.
How do we retain ourselves and remain whole in the path of motherhood? I think we could talk for the next 24 hours about that.
Right. And it's such a big thing for women as we change. And, you know, I understand not everybody is mothers. We don't all decide to become parents, but we may care for other people. We may care for our own parents as they age. We may care for family members, children. There's lots of ways that we care in our lives, that we end up having to care and give and pour ourselves out, even in career. And I feel like we often were given a kind of a mandate to do that in a way that maybe we lose ourselves a little bit. So my whole thing is how do we stay whole? How do we keep ourselves satisfied, happy, thriving, not just surviving, but thriving through these experiences that pull us in 100 different directions, so that we can influence the next generation to be amazing custodians of our planet. Like, so custodianship in Australia is linked to our understandings of the First Nations or Aboriginal or Indigenous people of Australia. And the idea of custodianship is that we don't own land, but we serve land. The land owns us. The land is the reason that we survive. So how do we care for it? So that's kind of my idea, is how do we become amazing caretakers of our natural environment, as well as giving that understanding to our children without making it like another thing to do.
I love that so much, because I've never heard that phrase in the way in which you just described it, of custodianship, of we don't own it, but we're caring for it. And I would venture to say that is exactly what our role is as mothers. We don't own our kids. We're simply here to guide them. And I find, you know, as a therapist and having worked with families and kids for over 20 years, aside from having my own children, I've got two teenage daughters who are almost 16 and 18. And in recognizing, you know, for me to really be a mindful parent, it's that very notion of we're just here to guide them, you know, respect their sovereign nature, that we need to parent to the child we have, not the one we wished we had, hoped we had, thought we had, but actually to the one we actually have, without presuming we know more about them than who they know themselves to be. So it's a very much of an ego check, right?
That's really interesting. So when I asked my mother what was one of the things that she really wanted to, because, you know, we have certain values that we carry close to our heart. And intentionally or not, we may desire that we pass on some of those values to our children. And my mother's one, which I thought was amazing, her most important one, was that we trust ourselves. And I thought, what a beautiful thing. Like it's not actually about something she wants for us. It's not really an agenda. It's how can we learn to trust our own intuition, our own inner guidance, and follow that determinedly without being told what to do, without other things influencing that. And how do we hold fast to what's important in our hearts?
That was a
and minds?
Progressive parenting belief for our mother's generation, right? Like that
right? I think so.
Yeah, definitely. And wow, it's a fascinating thing because so often we as parents, gosh, we're just jumping right in. This is amazing. So often I think we as moms, we dismiss our kids' inner truth because we don't always feel equipped to either honor what their truth is, or it's maybe an inconvenient timing for them, or it might be triggering for the parent to hear what the child's truth is. I mean, there's so many reasons. And I agree with your mom. That is an amazing value to pass on.
And those three things, that's so interesting. Those three things you just talked about there are a huge opportunity for women and mothers. And in the work that I do with mothers, those things that you just mentioned are often the things that we are trying to and working towards removing or eliminating or diminishing or just reducing so that you do have the time and space to offer what a child needs from you, because often, like you say, we want, of course, we want to be present with our children. We want to see those moments where they're asking for us to guide them and be able to be the best guide we can be. But if that happens on a school run or, like, how do you integrate that into what, our busy Western model of motherhood, which is about running around and ticking boxes and working and, all the things? How do we balance those two really important? We do have to work. We do have to get kids to school. They're important too. So how do we balance all of that? And I think it's sometimes it's in the balancing we lose the plot. And I really like to bring it back to, okay, what's really simple? What are really simple things we can do in our lives to create space for those moments, to create capacity in ourselves to be there for our friends, our family, our children, the things we love as well. So I'm a martial artist. So one of the things that I do is I make sure that I have space to train. And I train, I train really hard and I really like it. And it gives me, it's one of those things, I'm in the flow state where time slips by, and I think if you can find something like that, like that's a huge plus.
Yeah. I would love, because I know what it means to do what you're talking about. And I know what it means to do what you're talking about, but perhaps for the benefit of our listeners, maybe we could each share an example, if we stick with this piece of motherhood, around what it looks like in practice, maybe examples we've had with our own children or those we maybe have worked with. Because I want to make this really tangible for moms who are listening, or even just women who are caretakers of any kind, because I find it can be challenging to go from the conceptual or esoteric into tangible practice in a meaningful way. And I think it's so fun for me to stay on that conceptual, esoteric, existential level of like the importance and the, why do we want to do it? But I know so many people are like, that sounds great, but I don't know actually what you mean.
Yeah. How do you do that?
So
how do you do
what does that actually look like? So can you think of some examples?
Okay.
I've got some, but you go first and then I'll share some of mine. And I'd love to kind of deepen that in practicality.
Yeah, great. So a couple of things that have been happening for us lately. It's been the big summer holidays. So
which is so strange for me that you guys are on summer and we're like, I'm in California. When I say I'm freezing, that's all relative because it's, 3 degrees back east, but it's winter, you heard. Yes.
Yeah, I know. Right. So 6 weeks holidays, we went away for a week to a beautiful place down the South Coast. We went camping. It was relaxing. We had all this capacity and space. And then we came home. And there's that thing when you get home, and I felt it creeping in, the mental load, the list of things to do. That, you know, like I felt when I got here, I was like, I knew what my priorities were, which was I want to make sure I sit down and read books on the daily. I want to make sure that when my kid asks me for something, that I look them in the eye and I stop what I'm doing and I honor what's going on for them and I really answer them. And then life, you know, then life creeps back in really quickly. Like within a day or two, I noticed myself slipping into all the things that I do. So a couple of things that I did was, one was I put some actual spaces in my calendar. I actually scheduled them, thinking time, school drop-offs and pickups, things like that, to make sure that I don't overfill my calendar.
Yeah.
So I created space in my schedule, literally. You also do something, which I've been doing for a little while, to be honest, where I put a little bit of money away each month into a separate account, which is called rejuvenation. And this came off the back of a conversation with my husband where I said, I went to him and I was like, I am feeling like I'm always the bottom of the list. Like I'm never getting to the things that look after me. Like I've just got to do the washing up. I've just got to get my kid's school bag packed. I've just got to take her down to her friends and go to the shops. And, you know, like it's just the sort of upping the ante all the time. And then I just fall into bed at 10 o'clock. And at what point in the day have I actually taken care of myself, you know? And then I wonder why I don't feel good. I wonder why I'm so constricted and kind of angry, ragey mom all the time.
Well, yeah, which can then lead you to be reactive and short and impatient. And
which
is the exact opposite of you, which is the opposite of your intentions.
Right. And you hear yourself doing it and you're like, why am I yelling at this child about like because a lemon dropped on the floor or something, you know, something ridiculous,
right.
Like, and you just lose it because you're triggered like this and you're ready to go off. And I feel like that's my body and my heart and my mind telling me something's not quite right here. You need to take some action. So when that conversation happened, we put some money aside and I'm not allowed to spend it on anything else. It has to be something regenerative, like a massage, a facial, you know, and it's sometimes I don't do it once a month, I'll be honest, but the money sits there and it doesn't get touched. Even if it's a small amount of money, something just for you.
I love
just
that.
Stating that intention. Yeah. And it really has made a difference. Sometimes I forget about it. And then my little trigger happy self starts happening. And then I go to the account. I'm like, oh, look, there's $200 there. I can book a massage for an hour and a half, you know, but it makes me look at it. It makes me do that.
And I imagine by having the money set aside, it allows you to do it unapologetically.
Right.
Because that's one of the hard parts that so many women have is they feel guilty for doing so.
Yeah, it's really important not to, because you are the linchpin in a family, you know, like, so if you as a parent, mother or father, if you're not okay, they're not okay, like by default. So we have to prioritize ourselves, but we so often forget to do that. And I just also feel like even just setting the intention, like actually putting my money where my mouth is, taking that action encourages everyone in my family to do the same. So my daughter is then able to say, I just need a minute, Mum. I need to go and sit in my room and read a book for half an hour. You know, I mean, she's 9.
Well, and that's the beauty of you honoring yourself in that way, because you're not just doing it for your own self-care, but now you're role modeling it and you're demonstrating this is actually what being a good mom looks like, is taking care of yourself. Because I know so many of the clients I work with, it's such a typical mom narrative is that martyr mom who does it all without complaining, but ends up on the flip side of that feels an immense amount of shame and guilt for doing anything for themselves that isn't for the benefit of the family. And we have to recognize that what we do for ourselves is for benefit of the family on multiple levels.
And that's a really good trick. So if you're feeling like I couldn't possibly, you know, like it's too selfish, I'm taking too much for myself, that's a really good thinking trick to get yourself through that block, is to go, well, if you can't do it for yourself, if you're not there yet, if you can't value yourself that much just yet, because that's too confronting, because it can be really confronting if you're not used to it, then then do it for other people to begin with, until you realize that it genuinely is for you and you genuinely are worth it. Just do it any old way, like fake it till you make it, but make sure you do it,
Yeah. When I was growing up, my mom, I was raised by a single mom, and, as a kid, I really, really valued what one of her top priorities was, which was to always be there for me, have a job in which she could pick me up after school.
Wow, that's amazing.
She was always, always there for me. And the flip side of that was, unfortunately, I'm not sure she either felt that she could or she chose not to develop her own life. And so here I really held on to this value that she valued so highly. And yet I also saw that it perhaps maybe didn't serve her long term, like when my siblings and I didn't live at home anymore, right? And so I really made a concentrated and concerted effort to not do the same thing and hold the same value of always be there for my children. And how could I cultivate my own sense of self? Because I woke up one day in my early 30s, and I had been married to my high school sweetheart. And I said, I don't know who I am outside of these roles. Who am I outside of being a wife and outside of being a mom? And so I went on this personal journey, which over many years, one of the many cumulative effects of that was I got divorced. But I started that journey of who am I? And I started it with a lot of guilt, because in order to discover myself, I really enjoyed going on retreats, mindfulness retreats, meditation retreats.
Yeah, great.
And it was an immensely painful process in the beginning, because I have this horrible picture, and I feel even guilty that I paused to take a picture of it. But my very first time, I was leaving for a 7-day retreat, which is a long time. And it was a privilege at the time that I was even able to leave, and that I could have people help with my ex-husband. And at the time I was still married. But my youngest daughter was so distraught over me leaving that as I drove down the street, she ran alongside the car, sobbing, to the point where her dad picked her up. And I, had the picture of her at the stop sign at the end of my street, where she's horribly sobbing and arms outreached to me, like, "Mommy, don't go."
Yeah.
And it broke my heart into a million pieces. And I had to hold the space that I'm doing this for me, and that's okay. And that it's role modeling something very important to her. And then over the years, it got a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And I ended up, sometimes going far distances to go on a retreat. Well, years later, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years later, she and I one night were doing this bedtime ritual of this mom and daughter journal that, ask your mom questions, ask your daughter questions. And one of the questions was, describe your mom in, 1 or 2 words. The first word that she said was adventurous.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was like, wow. Because here I had felt like I've scarred her for going away for a weekend or 5 days or 7 days on a retreat from my own spiritual and professional journey. And what she took away from that was, my mom is adventurous. And
that's amazing.
It was so powerful for me, because I think so many moms would get caught in that reminder and that visual of their child sobbing tears, arms outstretched at the stop sign, "Mommy, don't go." My daughter used to even if I was going out for dinner with a girlfriend, she would hide my keys, and then she would bow down to me, like as if she were bowing down. And she would say to me, "Mama, stay." Instead of namaste, she would say, "Mama, stay." And
That's
it
brilliant.
broke my heart. But now she's almost 16, and she has a wanderlust spirit. She wants to go all over the world. She's already been all over the world. She's done things on her own. She's gone places that I never would have gone to. She took us, literally, her desires. We were in the middle of the Amazon for a week together, all because of her. So it's a helpful reminder to hold space for, this is hard in the moment, and what is the value I'm teaching that has this dual role?
Yeah, that's really interesting you talk about that. That reminds me of the research around attachment and breastfeeding. And so there's this very counterintuitive effect of secure attachment and breastfeeding. And there's an amazing clinic in Australia that's researching at the moment called the Possum Clinic, because we have marsupials in this country where these animals that carry, like kangaroos, that carry their babies in their pouches. So it's a lovely analogy for attachment, like baby wearing and breastfeeding, and, you know. And in fact, I saw some kangaroos on a holiday recently, these massive little joey, but quite big, crawling back into its mum's, like, and its legs were out, you know, like it's too big for it.
I just saw an Instagram reel. I just saw an Instagram reel yesterday highlighting that. And I'm like, these animals are incredible, because that little joey was huge.
And what a beautiful
tucked
way
all
to grow
inside.
up. So you've got this little space right next to your mum that you can crawl back to whenever you want. And I feel like we are getting better at replicating that safety for our babies now, with more baby wearing and longer breastfeeding. So I didn't understand. It's a big issue, especially in America, so I won't go into it too much, but I didn't really understand how much long, like natural term breastfeeding, so letting your baby and toddler breastfeed till they're ready to stop, the benefits of it, until I had my third child. And I had my third child in Bath in England, and there was a huge La Leche League community, which is this global volunteer community of breastfeeding consultants, lactation support people, free all over the world. It's incredible, La Leche League. And it was really active in Bath. So I had these groups of women who were supporting other women to breastfeed, and also breastfeeding into toddlerhood, which I hadn't seen as much of. It was amazing. And there's all this research now coming into our understanding of why secure attachment actually leads to greater resilience and greater ability to venture out confidently into the world. Like you're saying, your daughter was securely attached to you and didn't want you to go, and that you went anyway, and now look at her. And it's because she had that secure attachment, that she clung to you, but you just keep living your life, you know, but still allowing her to feel safe and attached. And that's a very powerful thing.
Well, it's so powerful. And I think it goes back to what we were saying about, you know, also how to speak to them in a way in which they can trust their inner wisdom, right? And part of that to me is validating the experience. I have a phrase that I always say to my clients, which is validation, then rationalization.
Well,
because I think parents too quickly go to rationalize the situation. Oh, don't worry, you know, I'll be back soon. It's going to be fine. In fact, perfect example, I'll give you this, because I think this is what you're explaining around building that trust that also can give the freedom, right? Because we as women want to not be tethered 100% of the time, because then we lose ourselves, which is what you started off saying.
Right.
But when I first got divorced, my ex would come pick up the kids for their weekend, and it was really, really hard transition for them. And aside from the fact that I stayed in the family home and they were used to being with me more of the time, and I had like 80% of the custody. So when they would leave, they would often get sad and cry. And a typical parenting response would be, oh, honey, don't worry. It's going to be fine. I'll see you on Sunday. It's only for 2 nights.
Okay.
You're going to be just fine. You know, you're going to be just fine. Don't cry. Daddy loves you. You love daddy. You're going to have a great weekend. That's all true. Those are all factual, true statements. And it does nothing to make the child feel seen, heard, and validated, or acknowledged in the emotion, because you're telling them you're fine, but they're like, but I don't feel fine. So now I don't trust myself to understand the sensation of what I'm experiencing in my body and what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, because the person I trust the most is now just telling me to dismiss what I'm feeling.
Yes. And it sets up that cognitive dissonance. Like, and I'm feeling one thing, but I'm hearing another from the person I trust the most.
And it's confusing. What
do I do with that?
So I used to acknowledge their tears and name it and say, yeah, this is really hard. It's really hard saying goodbye to mommy, isn't it? It's really hard sleeping somewhere that you're not used to sleeping yet. I totally get that. Come here, let me give you a hug. And my ex would actually kind of stand 2 feet behind me and text me and say, you're making it worse. It's like, no, actually I'm making it better. Because they're feeling acknowledged, that what they're feeling is valid and real and true. And paradox, 2 truths. And they are going to be okay.
Don't you think it's interesting? There's that real urge in our society to, like your husband was voicing, to not acknowledge emotion. You're making it worse. Like don't indulge it. Don't let that feeling be felt. And yet, we need our feelings to be felt.
Yeah. And I think that's, role modeling of what to do with our feelings when we feel them. It's, as parents, we are uncomfortable when our kids are uncomfortable. So oftentimes we're telling them to be okay because we want to be okay, because we have distress tolerance issues when our kids are in distress.
And we're kind of talking about emotional intelligence now, like emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, and the ability. And those skills, I mean, they don't just magically appear, right? They're like any skill. We need to go to Emotional Intelligence University and get a degree in it before we can say we're good at it. Like it's not something we just get. It's something that we practice over time. And gently, little steps, we get better at it. And I feel like often we go, well, I tried that and it didn't work. Like
I tried it one time.
Some slack. Cut yourself some slack. Give yourself some self-compassion that maybe you're not going to be able to just switch immediately. And kids can tell when you're just trying something out verbally but not really believing it too. Like everything takes time to develop. They also need time to adjust. If you're trying something out that's different to how you normally handle that situation, there's a part of them that's going to be like, what are you doing? Like, don't you just tell me I'm going to be okay and then we try and forget about it and then I get angry later? Like, isn't that what we do?
Right. There's so many examples I could go into about this, that it just highlights around our own inability to feel confident in either knowing how to do that, knowing what to say, what to do. And to me, the answer, what you named a moment ago, can be as simple as self-compassion. And my favorite compassionate statement is to simply say, this is really hard right now. And leave it there. Like, that's more than enough. We don't have to pretend that we have the answers or the solutions, but just simply acknowledge, this is really hard right now, isn't it? And it's also not going to last forever.
Right. It will pass. And I feel like this happens in relationships too, like in my relationship with my husband. If we're getting triggered by something, the temptation is to look for a reason or look for something to blame or something to assign that strong feeling to. Like, this big feeling is hanging out here. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. I need to anchor it to something. I need to make it a consequence of something so I can rationalize it. So I can make sense of it. So I can and sort of justify, like we talked about before, my reaction and my response. When often, if we can just take a moment and do a sort of a self-scan, self-examine process, go through some kind of inner process where we actually look at, okay, what did that thing hit inside of me? That's a Buddhist concept. If you get triggered, if something creates a big, you would know about this. What is it hitting in you? What is it in you that it is bumped up against? If you can identify that and then kind of own it and then go to your partner, I'm really sorry I overreacted to that thing you said. Actually, here's what I'm feeling, or actually, here's what happened. It reminded me of when I was a child and I wasn't heard by my parents, and I felt like you were doing that to me just then. But actually, it's just my own stuff that I'm bringing in from when I was a kid and I wasn't heard. I'm really sorry. That's a whole different conversation.
It changes the ball game.
Yeah.
And it takes an immense amount of self-awareness and patience to get to that place of curiosity. So even to be able to say in the meantime, can you bear with me while I try to
be
a minute. Curious. It's interesting. And sometimes those awarenesses don't come immediately. A couple years ago, my daughter, the one who I was telling you about, she got bat mitzvahed in Israel. And we had a 2-week journey to Israel. And it was my 2 daughters and my ex-husband who went to Israel for this bat mitzvah with a group from our synagogue. And prior to the 2-week Israel trip, I went to Switzerland by myself for 5 days while my ex took the kids to Italy. This was her bat mitzvah gift, was this, all she wanted was travel. And then after Israel, I took my girls to Paris, where my mom met us, and we went to Paris and then Amsterdam. So I was gone a full month. And at this time I was with my partner, but we were not yet engaged, but we had been together about 4 years at that point. But he was not included on this trip. And it was a real hardship for the two of us in relationship. Long story short, what I'm getting at is when I got home, and even while I was gone, he was really, really triggered. And it wasn't that he didn't trust me. It wasn't even that he was jealous per se. And it took him some time for curiosity. And about a month later, he said, you know what? When I was a kid, my parents used to travel internationally, and they would leave us home with babysitters that I never quite felt comfortable with. And I realized that my trigger when you were in Europe was triggering my childhood fears of when my parents would leave.
That's amazing.
He's also a therapist. So, you know, he has a good amount of self-awareness. And it speaks to the point you're talking about, that in absence of that curiosity, we can stay on the surface level triggers and the surface level pain or reactions without the compassion to say, what's underneath that?
Yeah. And you need to be in an accepting, safe space to admit those things, right? Some relationships are not attachment. That. Yeah. And some relationships don't have that foundation of, you know, how do we take a moment just to remember, okay, we love each other. We want to accept each other as we are, as we arrive to each other. How do we do that? You know, and it might be that when someone's talking, you don't advise, you don't step in and say, and maybe you say nothing. Maybe you just listen, like hold space, you know, that I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to advise you. I'm not even going to acknowledge. I'm just going to create a loving but neutral space in which you can explore or even express, I'm really pissed off with you. And, you know, try not to react to that. Try and be your best self and apply that compassion. And the application of compassion is sometimes to do nothing or say nothing.
Oh, Alena, you and I speak the same language, my dear friend.
Yeah, we do, right?
We really do.
So nice to meet you.
I know. So much in common. So in your Soul Mama Academy, what is it you specifically work with moms and how to teach this? What is it that are the practices that are some of your favorite tools, again, to take it from the conceptual to the practical?
Well, first, if you're right here, right now, I'd love to invite you to come and speak in my academy, because what we do,
I would love
of the things
to.
that would be amazing. One of the things that we do is we invite people like you who have, you know, an ethos or a concept or a specialization to share. And often we get people who are innovating something and they want to kind of test it out, come in and test it on us. And that's really beautiful. So we've had some amazing people. We've had like a Buddhist EFT tapping guy come in and show us how to clear our mind. We've had energy workers come in. We've had health coaches just come in and say, here's the 4 pillars of health. You know, so we do a topic every month. And so they're all different. And then they end up inside the academy as like lessons. So you kind of get this a whole host of ongoing and evolving kind of a pathway. I call it a roadmap, basically. I call it a roadmap to a lion life, to a courageous life. So the way that we do that is we do the monthly things, and then I also have these like women's circle, kind of like a coaching session, but it's quite small still, so we can all actually make it more like a circle, and we share wisdom on something that's got us stuck. And I try to have topics every month. And then there's a Facebook group in which we can also just have conversation whenever we want. We can go, I'm a bit stuck on this. So you kind of get this little sisterhood, which I think we all need. It's accessible 24/7, because my friends, I have a sisterhood in real life, but they're not accessible to me because we're all doing our thing. We live in different parts of the city and we speak once every 3 months, you know. So I just try to offer a kind of a sisterhood that is more accessible, that we can access.
Sounds like that rejuvenation money can go for some girlfriend time for lunches or a girl's overnight.
Totally. That's what I'm doing. I'm turning 50 next week and I'm going away for a weekend with 4 girlfriends.
Beautiful.
I'm very excited.
happy almost birthday. And
Thank
Elena,
you.
I feel like you and I literally could talk for hours. Like
Me
literally,
too.
I don't want this episode to end, but I think I'm just going to have to press pause on it, because if we
Yeah,
open up another topic, I think we'd be going for another solid hour, which would be great.
that's
And
right.
we'll just have to continue the conversation both on and offline. But I think, fundamentally, one of the things that I really, really, I mean, two things really that I'm taken away from what you've shared is that beautiful gift that your mother gave you, is that intention to really value what's inside. And if every mother can just honor with awareness and holding that space, that our children's truth truly is their inner wisdom and it's not the truth that we have for them, we'd have really, I think, a lot more happier people in the world who would feel accepted to just be who they are. Like,
So
wouldn't that be a
true.
beautiful intention?
Absolutely.
And I really love your idea of this rejuvenation fund. I think if women could really give themselves permission for that self-care, we'd have a lot more smoother, happier homes.
Yeah.
Because
Agree.
when we feel depleted, everyone's going to feel the impact of that.
Yeah, I agree. It's exactly why I do what I do. Totally agree.
Alena, thank you so
Jory.
much for sharing your morning with us. And I will have links in the show notes to your podcast, as well as to your Soul Mama Academy. I know the doors may not be open currently when this episode goes live, but just to at least have access to you and all the beautiful work that you're providing for other women. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It is definitely a necessary piece that we all need to be better. What was the word that I wrote down? Custodianships of this planet. Yes.
Thanks, Jory. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I hope everyone who's listening really took some great value out of this. And even just one small takeaway. And, find Alena and I are on social media. I'd love to know what someone's favorite takeaway from this was, because I got a handful. So this was really great. All right, everyone. I hope that you all take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat, visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.